Sophie had never believed in love at first sight, but that rainy afternoon at the small, cozy bookstore made her question everything she thought she knew about chance and fate. She had ducked inside to escape the drizzle, her hair damp, a book clutched in her hands, and she was wandering down the aisles, enjoying the smell of old paper and coffee from the tiny cafe in the corner, when she noticed him, a man with dark hair that fell lightly over his forehead, leaning against a shelf, completely absorbed in a worn poetry book. There was something about him that caught her attention immediately, something quiet, yet magnetic, a calm energy that seemed to surround him and make the room feel smaller, warmer, like he carried a private sun. She tried to look away, telling herself she shouldn't notice strangers in such a way, but her eyes kept drifting back, drawn as if by some invisible thread. He looked up then, and their eyes met, just for a second, and Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine, a sudden, inexplicable recognition, as though she had seen him somewhere before, somewhere in a dream. He smiled slightly, a soft, tentative curve of his lips, and it was enough to make her heart race. She forced herself to smile back, hoping it looked natural, and in that moment, a small spark ignited between them, quiet but undeniable, a spark that promised curiosity, warmth, and possibility. Sophie wandered closer, pretending to browse a shelf of travel books, while stealing glances at him, noticing the way his eyes moved over the pages, the gentle tilt of his head, the way he seemed completely lost in his own world but somehow aware of hers. She felt a strange pull, a tugging feeling in her chest that made her want to talk to him, to know him, to hear the sound of his voice and the rhythm of his thoughts. She took a deep breath and finally said, "Hi, are you looking for anything in particular?" His eyes lifted, meeting hers again, this time with a flicker of surprise, maybe a little amusement, and he closed the book gently. "Just browsing," he replied, his voice calm and smooth, carrying a subtle warmth that made her smile even wider. Sophie laughed softly, a little nervous, and said, "Me too. It's hard to resist all these books, isn't it?" He nodded, and they began talking, first about books, then about poetry, then about life in general, as if they had known each other for years, as if the world outside the bookstore didn't exist. Time seemed to bend and stretch, minutes feeling like hours, hours feeling like moments, and the rain outside seemed distant, a background melody to the symphony of their connection. Sophie felt a mix of excitement and comfort, a rare combination that made her heart flutter and her mind quiet at the same time. She noticed the little details, how he tucked a stray lock of hair behind his ear when he laughed, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the way his hands moved as he spoke, calm and deliberate, never fidgeting. She realized that she was already imagining what it might be like to spend more time with him, to sit in cafes together, to walk through rainy streets sharing umbrellas, to laugh about small, ridiculous things, to find comfort in each other's presence. He introduced himself as Daniel, and there was something about the way he said his name, firm but gentle, that made it feel familiar, as though she had heard it whispered in some quiet corner of her soul before. They shared favorite authors, recommended poems, and he asked her about her own interests, listening intently, eyes locked on hers, nodding thoughtfully, occasionally smiling in a way that made Sophie's chest tighten pleasantly. It was easy to forget everything else in that moment, the outside world, the dripping rain, the noise of cars and footsteps beyond the bookstore windows, because this tiny corner of the bookstore felt like its own universe, and they were the only two people in it. Daniel was charming but not in a showy way, it was subtle, the way he was present, attentive, curious, and kind. Sophie felt an unusual calmness in his presence, like she could breathe fully, think clearly, and just be herself without worrying about judgment or pretenses. She found herself telling him things she hadn't shared with anyone else, small confessions about her love of quiet mornings, her obsession with old bookstores, and her habit of sketching in little notebooks when she had nothing else to do. Daniel listened, genuinely interested, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that made her think more deeply about her own words, and it felt like a dance, a rhythm of conversation that flowed naturally, without effort, without forcing, just the simple joy of discovering another person. As the afternoon wore on, the rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the windows like a persistent percussion, and Sophie realized she had completely lost track of time, but she didn't want to leave. There was a magnetic pull that kept her rooted, and need to stay in that moment just a little longer, to soak in the warmth, the conversation, the shared smiles and quiet laughter. But then, as if drawn by some invisible rule, Daniel looked at her with a serious expression and said, almost gently, I should probably tell you something about me, though. I don't like tattoos. I mean, not even a little. It's just something I can't get past. Sophie blinked, caught off guard by the sudden seriousness. Her mind raced. Tattoos had always been a part of her identity and thought, a quiet fascination with designs that told stories, small marks that carried meaning. She nodded slowly, smiling politely, trying not to show the surprise or the flicker of worry in her chest. I understand, she said softly, feeling a pang of uncertainty, but also something else, a strange admiration for his honesty. He continued, I know it might seem small, but it's really important to me. I just can't be with someone who has tattoos. I wanted to tell you early so there's no confusion. Sophie felt her heart tighten, not because she didn't respect his honesty, but because she realized that one day, she might face a choice between someone she was drawn to so completely and a part of herself she couldn't ignore. They continued talking for a while, brushing past the awkwardness with laughter and shared stories, but the weight of his words lingered, subtle but heavy, a quiet reminder that even in moments of perfect connection, there were boundaries, expectations, and choices that could shape the path of their budding relationship. She left the bookstore later, umbrella in hand, rain still falling steadily, feeling a mix of exhilaration, nervousness, and curiosity. Her thoughts were tangled, she couldn't stop replaying their conversation, the way his eyes had searched hers, the sincerity in his voice, and the spark she felt, undeniable and alive. That night, as she sat by her window listening to the rain, Sophie traced the outline of her wrist with her fingers, thinking about the small tattoo she had always wanted, the one that symbolized calm, courage, and self-expression. She realized that a choice was coming, one that might test her courage, her heart, and perhaps even the possibility of love with Daniel. And yet, even with the uncertainty, a thrill ran through her, a feeling that life, love, and choices were always intertwined in ways that were scary, beautiful, and full of unexpected possibilities. She didn't know what the future held, whether Daniel and she would find a way to navigate differences, or whether her small acts of self-expression would push him away. But she did know one thing, there was a story beginning here, a story of connection, honesty, and the delicate dance between love and identity, and she was ready to face it, heart open, curious, and alive with the possibility that sometimes, the moments that challenge us the most are the ones that lead us to exactly where we're meant to be. The rain outside continued its steady rhythm, a gentle soundtrack to the storm of emotions inside her, and Sophie felt a strange peace in knowing that, no matter what happened next, she had felt something real, raw, and undeniable, and that was the beginning of everything. Sophie couldn't stop thinking about the tattoo she had always dreamed of, the tiny wave on her wrist, a symbol of calm and resilience, a reminder of the mornings she had spent watching the sea and the quiet strength she carried inside her, and each time she thought about Daniel, she felt that small tension in her chest, the pull between her desire to be true to herself and her fear of disappointing him, because she cared about him more than she had realized in those early days of their connection, more than she had thought possible, and every time she imagined showing him the tattoo, her heart raced with both excitement and apprehension, a wild cocktail of hope, fear, and longing, and she kept replaying the bookstore scene over and over, his serious eyes and quiet warning about tattoos, the way he had said it gently but firmly, as if trying to protect her from conflict while also setting a boundary he could not ignore. And Sophie knew that she was standing at a crossroads, the kind that tests courage and honesty in ways that are both frightening and exhilarating. Because to get the tattoo would mean claiming a piece of herself openly, but it might also risk the fragile connection they had built, and yet the thought of denying herself, of letting fear dictate her choice, felt heavier than any potential heartbreak. Heavier than any argument or moment of tension, and so, on a quiet Sunday morning, Sophie decided that she could no longer wait, that she needed to honor her own desires, her own identity, and the little voice inside her that whispered that courage was necessary, and she dressed in soft clothes, comfortable and familiar, the kind that made her feel grounded and capable, and she walked through the city streets, the air crisp with the lingering scent of rain from the night before, the sunlight breaking through clouds in gentle patches that highlighted the excitement and nervousness in her chest, and as she approached the small tattoo studio, her steps quickened, not with hesitation but with determination, because this was a moment of self-expression, a moment of declaration, a moment where she chose herself in the quietest, most profound way, and as she entered the studio, the familiar hum of the tattoo machines greeted her like a heartbeat, steady and alive, and the artist welcomed her with a warm smile, as if understanding that every person who walked through that door carried a story, a desire, and a courage unique to their journey, and Sophie felt her pulse quicken, her hands slightly trembling with anticipation. The tiny notebook she carried clutched against her chest, sketches of waves she had drawn in moments of quiet reflection over the years, each line a promise, a memory, a fragment of who she was, and she showed the artist her design, explaining the meaning, the significance, how it was a reminder to stay grounded, to embrace change, and to find calm even in chaos, and the artist nodded thoughtfully, setting up the workspace with care, cleaning and preparing, while Sophie felt the mixture of fear and exhilaration swell in her chest, that unique tension that comes before a choice that matters deeply, a choice that defines part of who you are, and as the buzzing needle touched her skin for the first time, she felt a jolt of electricity, a sting that was both sharp and exhilarating, like life reminding her that she was alive, making choices that were hers alone, and she focused on the sensation, the transformation, the little waves slowly taking shape on her wrist, each line deliberate, each curve meaningful, each moment a small act of courage and affirmation, and Sophie felt tears prick her eyes, not from pain but from the overwhelming sense of claiming herself, of honoring her own heart, her own desires, her own story, because tattoos for her were never just decoration, they were markers of moments, symbols of who she was, reminders of the life she wanted to live authentically, and as the session continued, she thought about Daniel, about his warning, about his boundaries, and she realized that this choice was more than just about ink on skin, it was about honesty, about integrity, about the courage to show someone who you truly are even when it might be difficult, and when the tattoo was finally finished, she looked at her wrist, tracing the delicate wave with her finger, feeling a rush of pride, relief, and a twinge of nervousness. Knowing that she now had to tell Daniel, knowing that this moment could change everything, and she left the studio, wrist wrapped, heart pounding, steps quick yet hesitant, the city streets alive around her, the sounds of traffic, people, and distant music blending into a background symphony as she rehearsed in her mind how she would show him, how she would explain, how she would hold her ground while still respecting him, and she felt a strange mix of fear and excitement, the kind that comes before a storm or a revelation, the kind that makes every heartbeat feel amplified and every breath heavier. As she approached the cafe where they had met days before, the place that had become a quiet haven in her mind, where laughter and conversation had flowed effortlessly, where the world outside seemed to pause and allow them to exist in their own bubble of discovery and connection, and she saw him sitting at the usual corner table, eyes scanning the pages of a book, oblivious to the nervous anticipation that radiated from her, and Sophie swallowed hard, taking a deep breath, steadying herself, feeling the weight of both love and self-respect in her chest, and when she finally reached across the table, showing him her wrist carefully, gently, the moment stretched like time itself had slowed, his eyes moving from the delicate wave to hers, searching, weighing, struggling with a conflict she could almost see reflected in the subtle tension of his shoulders, and Sophie felt a pang of fear, realizing that honesty sometimes comes with consequences, that standing for yourself is not always easy, and that love, as beautiful as it is, requires courage, understanding, and sometimes the willingness to face disappointment with grace, and she held her gaze steady, heart beating fast, reminding herself that she had chosen this moment, that she had claimed her voice, her body, her story, and no matter the outcome, she had acted with authenticity, and as Daniel's eyes lingered on the tattoo, his lips parting slightly as if words were forming but hesitant, Sophie felt the first stirrings of a confrontation that was not anger or resentment, but a quiet reckoning of differences, boundaries, and love, the kind that tests hearts and minds, and in that cafe filled with the aroma of coffee and the soft murmur of conversations, Sophie realized that sometimes the bravest acts of love are those that honor both yourself and the person you care about. That honesty is a bridge, and sometimes a wall, that standing your ground can feel like a risk but is also the only way to build a foundation strong enough to last, and she felt a strange, exhilarating hope that maybe, just maybe, this moment of courage could lead to a deeper understanding, a love that could embrace differences, a connection that was resilient enough to survive honesty, integrity, and the complexities of being fully human, fully seen, and fully yourself, and with that hope burning gently in her chest. Sophie knew that her journey with Daniel had entered a new chapter, one of truth, vulnerability, and the possibility of a love that was as real, delicate, and enduring as the tiny wave now etched onto her wrist, a wave that would forever remind her that courage matters, that authenticity matters, and that love sometimes begins with standing firm in who you are even when the world, or even the person you care about most, might not immediately understand. Sophie's chest felt heavy as she sat across from Daniel, her hands clasped together, the delicate wave on her wrist wrapped just enough to hint at its presence, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived, the moment where honesty and courage collided with love and expectation, because she had chosen herself, but now she had to face the reality of how that choice would impact the person she cared for most. And Daniel's eyes met hers, searching, conflicted, filled with a mixture of surprise, hurt, and something softer, something she recognized as concern, and Sophie felt a flicker of fear, wondering if this was the point where their connection might fracture, where the spark that had drawn them together might dim, and yet, she also felt a quiet determination, the resolve that had carried her to the tattoo studio still burning inside her, reminding her that authenticity mattered, that honesty was the foundation of any meaningful relationship, and that if love was to survive, it had to survive truth, even when truth was uncomfortable or challenging. And she took a deep breath, steadying herself, feeling the rhythm of her own heartbeat echoing the tension in the air, and Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and careful, as if weighing every word. "Sophie, I told you from the start. I don't like tattoos. I said it could be a deal-breaker. And now, you've done this." There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet sorrow, a soft admission of hurt, and Sophie's throat tightened as she met his gaze, feeling both the sting of possible loss and the relief of truth, and she replied gently, her voice calm but firm, "I know, Daniel. I remember what you said. But this is something I've wanted for years. It's part of who I am. I couldn't ignore it, and I couldn't pretend it didn't matter to me." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost tangible, stretching between them, filled with unspoken words, memories of laughter, long conversations, quiet walks, and the fragile hope that had brought them together. And Sophie realized that this was the delicate moment where love and individuality met, where boundaries and desires clashed, and where the choice to be true to oneself could either break a heart or deepen a connection. And she felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation, the kind that makes every second feel longer, every breath heavier, every glance sharper, because the path forward was uncertain yet necessary, and she could feel Daniel's internal struggle, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the subtle shift in his posture, the way his eyes flicked from her face to the small wave on her wrist, tracing the delicate lines as if trying to understand, to measure, to reconcile his own feelings with her choices. And Sophie reached slowly for his hand, not to plead or beg, but to bridge the distance, to show that her decision was not a rejection of him but a declaration of herself. And Daniel's hand hovered above hers, hesitant, almost tentative, his fingers trembling slightly, a sign that he was caught between love and principle, between desire and expectation, between the version of her he had imagined and the person she had become. And Sophie spoke again, softly, her words carrying the weight of sincerity, courage, and care. "I want us to be honest with each other. I want to be with you, Daniel, but I also want to be me. Can we find a way to navigate this? Can we understand each other without losing ourselves?" Daniel's eyes softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through the conflict, but he still looked away for a moment, the tension in his shoulders betraying the internal battle raging inside him, and he whispered, almost to himself, I need time. I need to think. I don't want to lose you, Sophie. But it's hard for me." Sophie's heart sank slightly, but she nodded, understanding that love was not always immediate, that understanding sometimes required patience, and that allowing someone to process their feelings was also an act of respect and care. And she felt the bittersweet ache of longing, the sharp edge of uncertainty, and yet also a quiet hope that time could heal, that love could adjust, that boundaries could bend without breaking the connection that had brought them together. And she squeezed his hand gently before letting go, standing slowly, feeling the warmth of the cafe around her, the faint aroma of coffee mingling with the tension in the air. And as she walked toward the door, she felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest, heavy but grounding, a reminder that choices matter, that courage is necessary, and that love, if it is real, must survive honesty. And she left the cafe with her head high, her heart racing, every step echoing with the possibility of heartbreak and hope intertwined, because she had chosen herself, and that choice was both terrifying and liberating. And Sophie spent the next days in a whirl of emotions, replaying the conversation in her mind, analyzing every glance, every inflection, every pause, and she realized that love was never simple, never neat, never predictable. It was messy, full of contradictions, full of risks, full of moments that could break you if you let them. And yet, despite the uncertainty, she felt a strange thrill, the kind that comes when you stand for something meaningful, when you assert your identity, when you live with integrity. And she thought about Daniel constantly, wondering how he was processing, whether he was angry, hurt, confused, or perhaps slowly coming to understand. And she tried to keep herself busy, throwing herself into work, friends, and small routines, but every quiet moment, every pause, every glance at her wrist reminded her of the wave, of her courage, and of the delicate balance between love and self. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gold and pink, she received a text from him, simple but loaded. "Can we talk?" Her heart leapt, fear and hope colliding violently in her chest, and she responded quickly, "Yes, when?" And he suggested the cafe again, the same place where everything had begun. And Sophie felt her stomach twist with anticipation, excitement, and dread, the mixture so intense it almost made her dizzy. And when she arrived, Daniel was already there, standing by the window, hands in pockets, eyes scanning the street. And when he saw her, his face softened, a tentative smile breaking through, a small but meaningful gesture that made her heart leap. And as she approached him, she felt 1,000 emotions crash at once, relief, fear, longing, love, vulnerability, pride, and hope, all tangled together, heavy and light at the same time. And they sat down, the cafe quiet, the soft murmur of other patrons creating a cocoon around them. And Daniel reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle, careful, and Sophie felt a shiver of recognition, of comfort, of connection. And he spoke, voice low but steady, "I've thought about what you said, about what you did, about why it matters to you. I realize now that I don't get to decide what makes you feel complete. I love you, Sophie, even with the tattoo, even with the differences between us, because love isn't about control, it's about understanding, caring, and choosing to be together despite imperfections, fears, and boundaries." Sophie felt tears prick her eyes, a mix of relief, joy, and the lingering fear of vulnerability, and she whispered, softly, "I was scared, Daniel. I didn't know if you'd understand. But I needed to be honest with myself, with you." He reached for her hand, covering it with his own, the warmth grounding her, and she felt the tension, the fear, and the uncertainty melt slightly, replaced with a fragile but growing sense of trust, of connection, of love that could survive differences. Because honesty had been the bridge, courage had been the key, and their hearts, though tentative, were opening together, slowly but steadily. And as they sat there, hands intertwined, watching the light shift through the window, Sophie realized that love was not easy, not always comfortable, but it was real, and worth the risk. And in that quiet moment, she felt the quiet power of choice, the quiet joy of self-expression, and the quiet promise that sometimes, standing your ground doesn't push people away, it can bring them closer in ways you never imagined. And the tiny wave on her wrist seemed to pulse with that promise, a small, delicate reminder that love, honesty, courage, and authenticity could coexist, and that even when hearts are tested, understanding and acceptance could flourish. And in that moment, Sophie knew that the next chapter of their story was beginning. Fragile, beautiful, and full of possibility, because Daniel had seen her fully, Sophie had stood for herself, and the love between them was learning to bend without breaking, to grow without losing, and to survive the delicate tension between hearts, choices, and truth. Days passed after Sophie and Daniel's heartfelt conversation, and Sophie found herself in a whirlwind of emotions, waking each morning with a mix of hope and anxiety, wondering if Daniel had truly processed what had happened. Whether the space between them had shifted in a meaningful way, and yet also feeling the quiet pride of standing up for herself and embracing her authenticity, knowing that the small wave on her wrist was more than ink, it was a symbol of courage, honesty, and self-respect, a reminder that she had chosen to honor her heart even when it felt frightening, and each day she checked her phone, her thumb hovering over it as if waiting for a signal, a word, any sign that Daniel was moving toward clarity, because love, she had realized, was not just about moments of happiness but about weathering uncertainty, embracing vulnerability, and allowing growth to happen in its own time. And finally, on a quiet Thursday evening, her phone buzzed, the message short but loaded, "Can we meet?" Her heart raced, chest tight with excitement and fear, and she quickly typed back, "Yes, I'll be there soon." She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel confident but not overly fussy, soft tones that mirrored her mood, and she walked through the city streets, feeling the gentle chill of evening air, the faint scent of rain on asphalt, the distant hum of traffic, and the warm lights of the cafe where they had first met calling to her, a beacon of familiarity and possibility. And when she arrived, Daniel was already there, standing by the window, his posture slightly tense, yet hopeful. His eyes searching the street until they landed on her, and in that instant, Sophie felt the old familiar spark, the magnetic pull that had drawn her to him in the bookstore months ago, and she walked toward him, heart pounding, every step a mixture of anticipation, fear, and longing. And as she reached him, Daniel offered a small, genuine smile, the kind that made her chest flutter, and Sophie sat down across from him, feeling the rhythm of their shared history, the unspoken connection that had survived both honesty and tension. And he spoke first, his voice low but steady, "I've thought a lot about us, about your choice, about what it means to be with someone you love without trying to change them, and I realized that love isn't about control or limits. It's about understanding, respect, and accepting someone fully, even when they are different from what you expected, and I love you, Sophie, with everything you are, including this tattoo, this wave, which I now see as a part of your story, a story I want to be a part of." Sophie felt a rush of relief and warmth, tears pricking her eyes as the weight of days filled with uncertainty lifted slightly, replaced with a tentative, fragile, but powerful sense of connection, and she reached out, letting her hand brush his, feeling the warmth and steadiness, the reassurance that love could bend without breaking, that differences could coexist, and that courage and honesty could lead to deeper understanding. And Daniel continued, "I was afraid at first, yes, because I didn't understand. I didn't know how to reconcile my expectations with your truth. But seeing you stand firm, seeing your bravery and authenticity, I've realized that the real risk isn't being yourself, it's not being with someone fully, genuinely, openly, and I want to be with you, Sophie, without conditions, without trying to erase any part of who you are, because the person I fell for is all of you." Sophie's heart swelled, a mixture of love, gratitude, and awe, and she whispered, softly, "I was scared too, Daniel. Scared you wouldn't understand, scared it would change everything. But I needed to be true to myself, to show you who I really am, and I'm so glad we're still here." They sat in silence for a moment, hands intertwined, breathing together, letting the words, emotions, and shared relief sink in, watching the light from the cafe windows reflect off the polished tables, creating a soft, golden glow around them. And Sophie felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, of being seen and loved fully, without compromise of her identity, her voice, or her choices. And Daniel reached across the table, gently touching the wave on her wrist, tracing it with careful fingers. And she smiled, feeling a thrill of intimacy, of understanding, of connection that went beyond words, deeper than explanations. And in that gesture, she saw his acceptance, his commitment, and the reassurance that love, when rooted in honesty and respect, could flourish even after conflict, even after fear, even after moments that tested hearts and courage. And as the evening light faded into night, they left the cafe together, walking side by side, the city streets alive with lights and distant chatter, sharing small smiles, subtle touches, and quiet conversations, feeling the gentle rhythm of life around them while also holding their own rhythm, their own story, one of honesty, bravery, and mutual respect. and as they strolled past familiar streets, Sophie felt the tiny wave on her wrist pulse softly, a symbol not just of the sea or calm, but of the journey she had undertaken, the courage she had embraced, and the love she had nurtured. And Daniel, noticing her quiet smile, squeezed her hand gently, a wordless acknowledgement of their shared triumph, their willingness to bend without breaking, and their commitment to understanding one another fully. And Sophie felt a surge of warmth, a deep satisfaction that love could be both tender and strong, that choices mattered, and that standing firm in truth could bring hearts closer rather than pushing them apart. And as they approached the park where they had once walked on a whim, laughing in the rain, Daniel paused, turning to her with a seriousness that belied the softness of his eyes. "Sophie, this everything between us, it's stronger because we faced it honestly. We didn't hide, we didn't compromise who we are. We just met each other fully, and that's rare, and I don't ever want to take that for granted." Sophie's eyes glistened, and she nodded, feeling the swell of emotion, the quiet power of love that had survived fear, the magic of connection that had been tested and found resilient. And they continued walking slowly, savoring the night, the cool breeze, the faint scent of flowers, the soft rustle of leaves, and every so often their hands brushed, a gentle reaffirmation of the bond they had nurtured, the understanding they had built, and the acceptance that had grown. And as they stopped by the little fountain in the park, the water shimmering under the streetlights, Sophie looked at her wrist, her small wave, and felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet triumph, a recognition that courage and honesty had led her here, to a love that was not perfect, but real, warm, and enduring, a love that had learned to embrace differences, respect boundaries, and honor authenticity. And Daniel, noticing her gaze, smiled softly, reaching for her hand once more, and in that touch, Sophie felt the full weight of their journey, the tension, the fear, the longing, the bravery, and ultimately, the profound joy of connection that could survive honesty, difference, and time. And as they walked home together under the night sky, stars faintly twinkling above, they both felt the subtle, unspoken understanding that love was not about perfection or control, but about choosing each other, standing together, and celebrating both the unique selves they were and the bond they shared. And the tiny wave on Sophie's wrist glowed in the soft lamplight, a constant reminder that she had chosen herself, they had chosen each other, and together, they had discovered a love that could bend without breaking, grow without demanding compromise, and endure even the challenges that life inevitably brings. And in that moment, with hands intertwined, hearts open, and the city softly humming around them, Sophie and Daniel knew that their story was only beginning, fragile yet strong, delicate yet enduring, and full of hope, understanding, and the quiet, unshakable beauty of love that is built on truth, courage, and mutual respect.